Queens and kings of spreadsheets, welcome back, your excellencies. In this video, we're going to spend some time learning about Excel's sort and filter features. We'll learn some new functions, and we'll discuss the perils of working with dirty, inconsistent data. Let's learn! Let's launch Excel. We'll create a new blank workbook. We'll double-click the Windows title bar to expand to full screen, and we'll save as, calling this sort plus filter plus tables. I'm going to zoom up to 200% so that my worksheet is easier to see, and the data we're going to get is online. It's available from Wikipedia, so let's open a web browser, and we'll perform a search using the phrase, largest U.S. companies by revenue. Now, toward the top of the search results, you should see a Wikipedia page that says, list of largest companies in the United States by revenue. So open that link. And now let's scroll down the page, and this first table you see here should have 500 rows in it. Now, this table lists all of the firms in the Fortune 500. This is the same database, it just doesn't have all of the additional data columns that Fortune offers in the database that it charges customers for. But this is going to be perfect for the exercises we're going to demonstrate. Now, depending on when you view this information in Wikipedia, you might be looking at different data than I'm showing you here. Firms and rankings are going to change over time. Now, that should be just fine. You should be able to follow along with these examples. If some of the firms mentioned aren't available or the industries are different, feel free to try the techniques out with different firms and industries, because it's not just okay to explore things on your own, it's recommended. Trying things on your own helps make sure that you can apply the concepts demonstrated with different data and different contexts. So let's go to the very end of this table of 500 firms, and in the last row and the last cell, click after the last word in the last cell but still inside the cell, then hold down the mouse and then start to scroll up top. Make sure that you've grabbed that very last item, and you can scroll all the way up to the top, and you want to highlight the entire table, including the very first word in the first cell in the header. That's this word rank right here. After you've got the entire word rank, I'm going to let go right there, and I've highlighted the whole table of 500 rows. Then we can copy this, return to Excel, and I've got a few options for pasting in this data. So let's try out these options and see what we get. First, I'll do a regular paste. The shortcut key for that on the Mac is Command-V. For Windows, it's Control-V. And this gives me a lot of formatting that I don't want, including these green and red up and down graphics. So let's undo this. We don't want this. But in a previous lesson, we also learned to use Paste Special. So we can go up here and use this little paste menu to the right of the paste icon that's on the home ribbon. Select Paste Special. This dialog box pops up. And if we select text and OK, like we did in an earlier exercise, this looks better, but the header information is a bit off. Now, we could retype the header information, but let's try one more option. So first undo, and then let's select that same pull down menu next to the paste icon on the home ribbon, and we'll select match destination formatting. And this looks great. There's only one problem. The paste added an extra row. This is row number 2, and that's because the data from the web page headers includes a value on 2 lines. So underneath the revenue header, there's a second line in parentheses that says USD millions. But we can fix this easily enough. Let's just click in D2. We'll copy this Command-C shortcut on the Mac, Control-C in Windows. Then we'll click in D1. We'll click on the formula bar right after the word revenue, add a space, and then we'll paste in this parentheses USD millions. Press return to accept the change, and we'll right-click on row 2 and select delete. This looks pretty good. You just grabbed the Fortune 500 data and pasted it into a worksheet. So now let's look at what we've got. We're going to explore this data by using Excel's sort, filter, and table features. Now, this is a pretty big data set. Sometimes you want to scroll around, but you might want to keep the top row, the headers, from scrolling. Or maybe you want to freeze the columns to the left, say the one that holds the rank numbers and the one that holds the firm name. Well, Excel allows you to do this using the Freeze Panes feature. You just click in a cell and tell Excel to freeze panes, and any rows above that cell and any columns to the left of that cell will be frozen. Let's see how this works. Now let's click in cell C2. Now you see how just above C2 is this row with all of our headers, and just to the left of C2 are the 2 columns, column A that has the rank values and column B that has the firm name. Well, we can now freeze row 1 and column A and B so that they don't move when we scroll. So to do this, let's head over to the View tab. The ribbon changes, and let's find this icon that says Freeze Panes. Now when I click this, and as I scroll, the first row is frozen at the top of my screen. And also, if I scroll to the right, I can see that my leftmost columns, column A and column B, are frozen as well. Very handy. Now you also might have noticed when you clicked on Freeze Panes, the icon label changed to Unfreeze Panes, so this icon just acts as a toggle. So if you click Unfreeze Panes, it removes the pane freeze. You can scroll around now. None of the rows or columns are frozen, but if you click Freeze Panes again, since we're still clicked in cell C2, row 1 and columns A and B are once again frozen. Now let's learn how to sort the data, and we can find the sort functionality under the Data tab. So let's click on Data, our ribbon changes, and then let's click this icon here that says sort. Now this brings up the sort dialog, and if you look just behind this box, you can see that Excel has made its best guess as to the range that contains the data that you want to sort. Now also notice that Excel has checked this option in the upper right hand corner of this box that says My List Has Headers. Now if you uncheck that, notice that the range in the back selects the first row, so it would sort with the first row with headers in it, but that's not what we want, so be sure that we've checked My List Has Headers since the first row contains headers. And also notice that the box on the left says Sort By, and if we click in that line just under the word column, we get a list of all of the columns according to our header names. Cool. So in here, I'm going to select employees, and that'll sort my data on the employees column. Now under order, it says smallest to largest. If I click OK, we see all of our rows get reordered, sorted from the smallest number of employees to the largest. I can see the Fortune 500 firm with the smallest number of employees is NGL Energy, or at least it was in this data set that I'm looking at this particular point in time. But what if we want to order these from the firm with the largest number of employees to the one with the smallest? Well, that's also pretty easy. Just click on Sort again. The dialog box comes up. It already shows the existing sort. But if you click under Order again, you can see that you can change this to largest to smallest. Then click OK, and we can see the firm with the largest number of employees is Walmart. Number 2 is Amazon. That's interesting. That wouldn't have been the case a few years ago. Number 3 is Yum China. This is a firm that's headquartered in Plano, Texas, but it runs a bunch of fast food restaurants in China, including China's KFCs, Pizza Huts, Taco Bells, and a bunch of other ones. Now there's another important lesson we can learn from taking a look at column E. That's this one that's labeled revenue growth. So we got this column from the Wikipedia page, and it's not very useful for sorting, because if we click on sort and then we click on revenue growth, we see that Excel offers to sort this from A to Z, not smallest to largest or largest to smallest. And it does that because most of the values in this column begin with either the word increase or the word decrease, and that's text. It's not a number. So if we click on OK, we see how useless this is. First, we see a couple of firms that don't have any growth data. These are probably firms that were new to the Fortune 500 this year. But then if we scroll further, we see a bunch of firms with decreasing values. They start out in the zeros, then they go 1 through 1.9. But after 1.9, we see that it decreases by the 10s, and then they decrease by the 11s and the 12s. Now after the value 1.9, you would expect the values in the range of around 2% to show up, not 10%. And the reason for that is this is how numbers are alphabetized. When we order these things alphabetically, 1.9 is followed by 10 and 11, not by 2. Now in a future lesson, I'm going to demonstrate a technique that you can use to extract the percentage values, put them in another column, and preface any decreasing values with a negative so that you can sort on these values. But for now, let's just get rid of column E. So we'll right-click on the E and we'll select Delete. Now you can return to the rank order by clicking anywhere inside of the range of data that we're sorting on, then click Sort, pull down and select a sort by rank. Smallest to largest is good, and click OK. Well, we've got sorting down. That changes the order of our data. But what if we want to filter the data so that we just look at a subset of data that matches a particular criteria? So for example, let's say we just wanted to look at those Fortune 500 companies that were headquartered in Massachusetts. Well, we can do that using Excel's filter feature, and we can find that by clicking on this icon here that says filter. The symbol looks sort of like a funnel. Whenever you see that, that means filter in Excel. And when we click this, notice that little drop-down arrows show up on the right-hand side of the column headers. And if we click any of these down arrows, we can get additional options for sorting and filtering data. So let's click the down arrow that's next to the headquarters column. And that brings up a box that says headquarters at the top, and that indicates that we're working with the headquarters column. Now we could click on sort in ascending or descending order, but instead, let's go a little bit lower down in this box into this search field that's located in the filter position of the dialog. Now right under this search box, there's a list of all of the headquarters values in our data, one for each of the cities that you'll find in this column. Now the values aren't repeated, so if there are multiple firms in, say, New York City, New York, then New York City, New York is shown just once. Now all of these values are checked, and that's because the first item in this list, select all in parentheses, is also checked. But if we type Massachusetts in this search box, we see that the list of names in the box below it only contain the values that have the word Massachusetts in them. And if you look at the worksheet behind this box, you can see that we filtered the data so that it's only showing those rows that have Massachusetts headquarters. Now, it's tough to see, but if you look at the icon in the lower right of the headquarters cell, the header up here, that used to be just a downward pointing triangle or arrow, but now it shows the funnel. And that funnel indicates that we're filtering on our results using criteria in this column. Now, if I like these results, I can just close this box and I can see my filtered results in Excel. But there are a few things to note. First, take a look at the row numbers. Now, there are a bunch of missing numbers here on the left-hand side. The rows are still in the same order that they were before applying the filter, but you don't see the rows that have been filtered out. These non-Massachusetts rows are still in your worksheet, they're just not showing. Now this raises very important implications if you try to perform calculations on filtered data. So let's do this right now to demonstrate. We're going to go in the lower left-hand corner, and in cell A502, let's enter a new function that we haven't used before. This is the count function, and what that will do is it will count up all the cells in the range that have numbers inside of them. So there are 16 rows showing firms in Massachusetts. So if I type into cell A502 equals count, that's C-O-U-N-T, open parentheses, and then select the range for the cells that I'm showing in here. Now you might already be able to tell what's going to happen. You can see the cell range that we selected is from A34 through A415. If I press return, this gives us 382, that's not at all the 16 that I had initially expected. So what it did was it actually counted up all of the rows, A34 through A415 inclusive. That includes the rows you can't see, and that's how come I've got 832 rows here. So even if you filtered a range, if you use a range in your calculation, it's going to include all of the cells in that range, even the ones that aren't showing because they've been filtered out. So similarly, we can head over here to cell E502, and if we enter a sum in here with equals SUM, open parentheses, and we drag to select all the visible cells, well, what we get is a range that includes cells that aren't showing or aren't visible right now. That range says E34 through E415, and this is going to do the same thing. If we press return, it sums up all the rows in the range, including the ones we can't see, so this number is much bigger than what we were expecting. Well, it is possible to copy the values that we filtered out, and if we use copy, we'll just get those values that are showing, and we can paste these filtered values into another worksheet, and we can perform calculations on just those values that don't include any hidden values. So let's give this a try. We will click first on row 502. Now I'm going to use a shortcut to select all of these rows. So I'm going to hold down the Shift key now after I've made my click. I'm going to keep my finger holding down the Shift key while I click row 1. See what this does? Shift clicking like this highlights all of the rows from where I first click to where I clicked at the end. And now I'm going to copy on Mac Command C, on Windows Control C, and I can see the marching ants, and you can see the ants marching around just the visible cells. It's not showing the ants march around one big box for this entire range. So now let's open up another worksheet. I'm going to click on the plus sign in the lower left-hand corner next to the Fortune 500 tab. This creates a new worksheet. I'm going to rename this by double-clicking on Sheet 2 and typing in just MA and pressing return. And I'm going to paste in the values that I just copied. I'll zoom in at 200%, but we can see there are just 16 rows in between the header and row number 18. Now, it doesn't look like we have any hidden rows since these rows are numbered and they're all consecutive, and that's true. We just have the rows that we pasted in. Now, what about these values in row 18? These numbers are the same values that we got when we performed the calculation using the hidden rows. And that's correct, but if we click on E18, we don't see the sum formula in here. Excel just copied over the value, not the formula. Normally it does copy the formula, but here we've just got a number. So the current value that we copied over is 19 million. That's too big. Let's go ahead and sum this properly. With E18 clicked, I'm going to head over to the Home tab. I'm going to click on Auto Sum and look at the calculation that's added. It says equals sum, and then in between the parentheses we have our range E2 colon E17. These are 16 rows in the range. There are no hidden rows in there. These cells are all showing. We'll press return, and we see the real sum of total employees in Massachusetts for the Fortune 500 is a little over 1 million. That's far less than the 19 million we had when we performed a calculation on filtered rows and also included the unfiltered data. Now let's click on cell A18 and add our count function. So we'll say equal count, open parenthesis. I'll select from A2, drag down to A17, press return, and we see that value calculates as 16. Nice. So now that I've got the correct calculations on my new worksheet, I'll return to the Fortune 500 worksheet and delete the calculations that were giving me bogus data. And I can also remove the filter that was limiting the data to just Massachusetts firms. And I can do this by first clicking the Data tab so that I show the Data ribbon, and then clicking on this highlighted filter icon. That acts as a toggle. It removes the filter, the highlight goes away, and I'm once again showing all the 500 rows in my Fortune 500 data. Now, in addition to toggling off the filter icon, I could also have clicked on the clear icon, and I'll show you that now. So first let me undo the last command, then the filter is back on, and I'm showing just those Massachusetts values again, and the clear filter button is up here. It looks like the little funnel, but with a red X at the bottom, and I'll click that. I can see all 500 rows for the 500 firms in the Fortune 500. This is just another way to clear filters. Now, the difference here is that that even though I've cleared the filters are still active. I can still see these downward pointing triangles that are in each of my headers. Now, if you want to completely get rid of the filtering options and remove the filter triangles, you can just click Filter again. That completely toggles off filtering, but let's keep filtering on. Now, we had just shown the firms that were in Massachusetts, and while doing this, we showed problems with trying to perform calculations on filtered data, but we also showed you how you can copy just the filtered data, move it to a new location, and then use that for your calculations. So hopefully you understood all that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to filter out data for just those Fortune 500 firms that are located in New York City. But while doing this, we're also going to demonstrate issues related to inconsistent data. That's sometimes referred to as dirty data. It's a really important issue in data analysis, and if you're using data that's more recent than the data that I'm showing you here, you might not have this dirty data issue. If not, you can just follow along and watch what I'm doing, but if you want to try out the technique that I'm about to show you, you can go into our Excel folder at bit.ly/excel-starter-files, and I've saved a copy of this data there for you, calling it dirty-fortune-500-data, so feel free to download that and try it if you want. Now, your instructor might have given you some specific additional requests if you're following along these videos and submitting work, but if you need the original data, now you know where you can find it. So let's show just those Fortune 500 companies headquartered in New York City. So let's click the downward pointing triangle in the lower right of the headquarters header cell, and in the search field here you can type in New York. But this gives us all of the headquarters that have New York in their headquarters field, including any that are in New York State, not just New York City. So if I want to limit the search results to just New York City, I can finish typing into the search box the entire phrase New York City with city right at the end. And we see something interesting. There are two values listed instead of just one. The bottom one says New York City, New York, but the one above that says Midtown Manhattan, New York City. Now this inconsistency is an example of dirty data. This data was entered inconsistently. All of the other values say the city name and then the state. And when you have data that's entered inconsistently, this can cause problems when you sort or filter on inconsistent criteria. And let's take a look at this. Let's close this box and we'll look at all of the data filtered so that just those values that are headquartered in New York City show. And if we scroll through the data, we see the culprit. Someone entered Colgate-Palmolive, but they didn't put in New York City, New York. They left the state out, and instead they wrote Midtown Manhattan, New York City. There's no state in there at all. And this is also bad because some of these other firms that are headquartered in New York City are also headquartered in Midtown. But that's not the criteria that we used. We're not keeping track of an area of a borough in New York City. Headquarters should be consistently entered as city and state. Now, why is this a problem? Well, if we were to use this data and filter it on the exact criteria New York City, New York, we wouldn't get Colgate-Palmolive in that data. And so any calculations wouldn't include $15 billion plus in revenue, Colgate's revenue, and its 34,000 employees. So to really drive home the risks associated with dirty data, let's show you this exact risk. So we'll click on the downward pointing triangle to bring up the filter box for the headquarters field. And in the search criteria, let's type in New York City, New York. And now we can close the filter box and we see all of these firms headquartered in New York City. We don't see Colgate-Palmolive in here. How come? Because the headquarters was not entered for Colgate-Palmolive as New York City, New York. So let's take this data and we'll move it to a new worksheet and we can compare this with the data after we set up a criteria that includes Colgate-Palmolive. So I'm going to click on this very last row. That's row 486. I'll hold down the Shift key. I'll select the first row. All my rows are highlighted. I'm going to copy them. Then I'll click on the plus down in the Worksheet tab. This adds a new worksheet. I'll double click on the name Sheet 3 in the tab and I'll rename this as just NYC. Press Return. Then I'll paste all of the values in that I just copied. I'll zoom this up at 200% so it's a little easier to see. And then down here in A47, let's do a quick count calculation so that we can find out how many rows we've got. That tells us we've got 45 rows. And in D47, let's sum up our revenues. And the result here gives us over 1.2 million, but remember, these are valued in millions. So this is really 1.2 trillion in total revenues for those firms headquartered in New York City. But remember, Colgate-Palmolive is not being included in here because of dirty data. And before we add Colgate-Palmolive, why don't we go up here and insert a row on the top to indicate that this data is from the search on New York City, New York. Cool. Then let's copy the contents of A1, and I'm going to place the data with Colgate-Palmolive just below the current data. So I'm going to click in cell A50, and I'm going to paste in the text that I just copied, but I'm going to change this descriptive text here so that it says search on just New York City. And so now let's get the data with Colgate-Palmolive. So we'll return to the Fortune 500 worksheet. We'll click on the filter triangle in the headquarter header cell, and in the search field, we'll type New York City. Now Excel actually used the search criteria that we typed in to filter on the two specific instances that would match this condition. The two possibilities are listed up here. One is equals Midtown Manhattan, comma New York City. Now that whole phrase isn't visible, but it is in here, and we'll show records when either this is true or the headquarters equals New York City, comma New York. And again, we can't see the full phrase in here, but that's what it says. And we also see that both of these possible headquarter values are clicked and selected in the choice list below. If you wanted to, you could modify this query, but this looks fine, so let's go ahead and keep this. So I'll close the filter box, and we can see that this data now includes the Colgate data. So let's copy all of these rows. Then we'll head back to the Just New York City worksheet, and we'll make sure that we've clicked in A51, and this is where we'll paste in our new data. And so now let's do a count calculation in A98. So we'll select the range that is just this new New York City data with the Colgate-Palmolive row. And this gives us 46 rows. That's different from the 45 rows that we had before. But even more importantly, if we sum up based on revenue, the old value was 1,226,111, and with Colgate-Palmolive, we get 1,241,804. Now, this is a really important lesson because sometimes your data isn't entered consistently, or it comes from two separate information systems where it's coded differently. And those of you who are using these Excel examples with my information systems textbook will know that we talk about data cleanliness and consistency in the data asset chapter. And clean, consistent data is vital for reliable business analytics and machine learning. Now, we're seeing the same issue in Excel because if you filter or sort on a specific term, and that term isn't used in the same way throughout your data, you're going to get inconsistent and incorrect results. Here, our revenue calculation would have been off by over $15 billion. So dirty data, a big deal. You want to make sure that you've got consistent coding throughout all of the data that you filter and sort on. So we'll leave the Just New York City worksheet here as an example of the problems with dirty data, but let's head back to our Fortune 500 worksheet and clean up this data. And since we only have one problematic row, cleaning it up is pretty easy. We can just click on a cell in the headquarters column that contains the correct New York City, New York value. Copy that, then click on the dirty data in the Colgate-Palmolive headquarters cell, and I'll paste the correct data to replace the dirty data, and now all of my New York City entries have clean and consistent data. And if you want to check that everything works, if you click on the filter triangle and enter New York City, New York in the search box, and then close the filter box, you can see that we've got Colgate-Palmolive in there along with all of the other New York City data. Cool. And if you were designing an information system and you had data that was coded differently in two different information systems, you'd probably write a computer program that would go through potentially vast amounts of data, and every time it found data that was coded in an incorrect way, it would either flag it for change or it would change it directly if the rules for updating were clear. Now, I encourage you to explore sort and filter features more on your own. For example, you can sort on multiple criteria. So we can click on sort and sort on industry in alphabetical order, A to Z, but if we click plus down here, we can also add a second level to this sort, where we can sort based on revenues, sorted largest to smallest, and when we click OK, we can look through the different industries that are sorted alphabetically, and then within industry, we can see each firm in the industry sorted from largest firm to smallest firm. Now we can clear the criteria we're using, and we can click to sort the rank in ascending order so that we're back where we were originally. And we've also got more control over filtering. So for example, if we click the filter triangle in the revenue column, we can select filter criteria under the choose one pull down, and let's select less than or equal to, and we'll enter 6,000, which is revenues less than or equal to 6 billion. And this filtering lists 14 firms in my data. Or if we want to see which firms have over $500 billion in revenue, we can filter on greater than or equal to 500,000. That's really 500 billion. And the only firm that meets that criteria is Walmart. So we've just scratched the surface, but now you know enough to further explore on your own. Now, I do want to spend a bit more time on a function that we just learned about. That's the count function. And that's because count behaves in ways that are a little bit unexpected. And to demonstrate this, why don't we head back to our Just MA workbook. And now let's notice what we have in cell A18. We get a count of the range from A2 through A17, and this calculates to, with my data, 16. That's because there's 16 cells in the range, or 16 firms in the Fortune 500 from Massachusetts. But here's the unexpected part. Let's copy the formula in A18, and then let's paste it in F18, and whoa, we get 0. Now, our formula looks correct. There was a relative shift of the range, so we're now getting a count from F2 through F17, but that looks fine. But let's take a second look at the count function, and I'll show you how we can find some additional function help in Excel. So I'm going to retype the function into F18. I'm going to say equal sign count, and I have lots of different options that start with count, but I'm going to select the one that just says count. So I'll highlight this, press tab to accept it. But now I'm going to click on this blue link that shows up as a sort of tooltip beneath the cell, and you want to make sure that you click right on the word count, and this brings up some Excel help. Now, it includes a description of the function, some video help. You can watch the video if you want. It includes a description of the syntax. And look at this right here in the description. It says that this function counts the number of cells that contain numbers. Oh, well, we don't have any numbers in this column. We just have cities. So let's take another look at these other count functions here and see if we can find something that's going to suit our needs. So if I press the delete key, get rid of the open parenthesis, I can once again see a list of functions that have the word count in them. What if we select this one here that says count A? Let's highlight that one, press tab, and if we click on the link to count A, we take a look at the Excel help description of the function, and count A counts cells containing any type of information as long as it's not empty. That's what we want. So let's close the window. We've got the function count A in our cell. Let's select our range. We'll press enter, and we get the expected value of 16 from count A. So not only did we learn the difference between count, which is just numbers, and count A, which counts the numbers of any value that's not empty, so you can think of the A means any, we also learned how to get some additional help from Excel. Now we're going to cover Excel tables, but why don't we save that for the next video because we've already covered a lot of ground. You might want to take a break, so why don't you save your work and you can open up this file when you start your next video lesson. But excellent one, we have once again learned a lot of new concepts in this lesson. We've learned how to freeze panes to make our data easier to read. We've covered sorting, sort order, and sorting on multiple criteria. Filtering and setting filter criteria, the danger of performing calculations using filtered data, the count function, the count A function, the perils of working with dirty data, how to recognize dirty data, and how to clean data, as well as how to get function help in Excel. I hope you feel your Excel skills are getting truly excellent, and remember, be excellent to each other.